Ground Zero, Chapter 13, Brandon, the 93rd floor. "Hey," said Brandon's rescuer. "You're that kid from the escalator this morning." Yes, that's where Brandon had seen him before, the bald black man with the beard who had almost spilled his coffee all over Brandon and his dad. It seemed like forever ago, but it couldn't have been more than an hour. "Looks like it turned out to be a bad day anyway," the man said, helping Brandon sit up. "Name's Richard." Brandon. "What the heck were you doing out there?" he asked. "You could have died." Brandon shivered. "I'm trying to get to the windows on the world, to my dad. He works up there." The swirling smoke around them made Brandon cough. Richard held a damp t-shirt up to his own face with one hand and reached out to his pant pocket and pulled out a wet handkerchief for Brandon. "Here, I brought this in case I found somebody," he said. "Come on, let's get out of here." They held on to each other as they made their way crouching down the dark, smoky hall of the 89th floor. It didn't feel weird at all to Brandon to be clinging to a stranger right now. It was reassuring to connect with someone else who was sharing in the struggle to survive. It was the kind of feeling Brandon had with his father, he realized, like they were in this fight together. They couldn't see more than a few inches in front of them for the thick black smoke, and Richard felt his way along the wall. It smelled like a gas station up there, and the sharp odor bit at Brandon's nose and throat and made him a little dizzy. He held the wet handkerchief Richard had given him closer to his face. They came to a steel door that was bent like the door from the stairs had been, still hanging on its hinges, but folded down on itself like a crushed can. A sign on the door said Junhee Law Offices. Richard tried the door. It wouldn't budge. He pounded on the door. "Mr. Chen," he called, his voice raspy from the smoke. "Mr. Chen, are you in there?" Richard rattled the door handle again, but it wasn't going anywhere. Through the gap in the door, Brandon could see steel beams and ceiling tiles and drywall piled up behind it. "I don't think anybody can get through all that," Brandon said. "Not until the fire department comes to help them climb out." "If he's still alive," Richard said quietly. Brandon felt a chill run through him. So far, he hadn't seen anyone seriously injured by the accident. He knew people had to have been hurt, maybe even killed. There were whole offices missing right behind him, but to think that there might be a dead man right behind this door, buried in the rubble. "Worked on the same floor as that guy for 7 years, Richard was saying. "Every day I'd seen him going to his office, I'd say hello, and not once did he ever say a word back to me. Only thing I know about him is that he swings his tie over his shoulder when he stands at the urinals to pee. Now he's probably dead, crushed when the ceiling fell in on him." Brandon stared at the bent door, wondering what it would like to have the roof fall on him, to be crushed under the weight of an entire floor. Had Mr. Chen died right off, or was he still alive under there somewhere, trapped and choking to death on the smoke from above? "Come on," Richard said. "There's nothing we can do for him, and we're dying out here." They kept walking, and Brandon saw the door to stairwell C. Richard went right past it, but Brandon stopped. "Wait," he said. "I have to go upstairs. I have to get my dad." "Listen, kid. I don't think you're getting up to the 107th floor, Richard said. "Something bad happened somewhere upstairs. A bomb or something. You saw the whole east side of the building is gone." "It was an airplane. A passenger jet hit the tower," Brandon said. "That's what someone said." "Jesus," said Richard, looking stunned. "Come back to the office with me. We called 911 and they told us to sit tight until the firemen get there. I've just been out collecting up any other survivors on the floor." "No, I have to get to my dad," Brandon persisted. He opened the door to the stairs. It was filled with the same kind of debris Brandon had struggled up in stairwell A, and the clear liquid coming down was a gushing waterfall, but at least the stairwell was still there. The way down was blocked, but Brandon thought there was room to scale the wreckage. "Whoa," said Richard. "You can't make it up through all that stuff." Brandon climbed into the stairwell. "I did it before to get up here," he called over his shoulder. Wait, you can't go alone." Richard hesitated, clearly trying to decide what to do. "All right, dang it, I'll come with you." It was easier going with two of them. Richard held on to something and pulled Brandon up, and then Brandon did the same for him, working their way through the wreckage like mountain climbers. They didn't talk during the ascent. They were both huffing too much from the effort and from the thick smoke roiling in the air. Up they went past the closed door to the 90th floor and the 91st floor. The rubble was its thickest yet at the landing to the 92nd floor, where they paused to catch their breath. The door to the 92nd floor was bent too, and behind it Brandon could see another mountain of debris. It was so hot that sweat poured from Brandon's hairline, and he dragged a dusty sleeve across his face. "Ever been to New Orleans?" Richard asked him. Brandon shook his head no. Richard mopped his neck with the end of a wet t-shirt. "It's like this in the summer," he said, "only without the smoke." Brandon hoped it wouldn't get any hotter, but every hope he had was dashed when they got to the 93rd floor. There was no way up the set of stairs. The landing was completely filled with drywall, metal, and concrete, all packed down like a landslide. Brandon tried the door to the 93rd floor, but it was hot to the touch. Through the cracks in the walls, he could see swirling orange flames inside. The heat burned Brandon's face like sunburn, and the black smoke poured through every opening. The whole 93rd floor was on fire. Richard coughed through the wet t-shirt he'd pressed against his mouth. "We can't go any higher, kid. I'm sorry, we have to go back down." "No!" Brandon cried. "My dad is up there, and this is the only way up." Brandon slipped and scrambled up the rubble. He pulled at pieces of drywall until they snapped. He tried to dig his way up, but there was just more drywall and steel behind that, and behind that. There was no way up to his father and windows on the world. Brandon felt empty inside, like the life had been sucked out of his body. No, 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 he cried, kicking and beating at the wall of the debris. Richard picked him up from behind and Brandon thrashed in his arms. We can't go up, kid. I'm sorry, Richard told him. That plane must have hit the floor right above this one. Look, it smashed the whole floor. There's no getting past that in this or any other staircase. But I have to, Brandon said. Tears streamed down his face. We're a team. Me and my dad, we're a team. And I left him, and now he's trapped up there, and I'm all alone down here. I'm sorry, kid, Richard said. I really am. But we gotta get out of here before we breathe in too much of this smoke. Richard carried him down, his feet slipping and scrambling, back to the 92nd floor. When they got to the flat part of the landing, Richard finally let him go, and Brandon slid down against the wall and buried his head in his hands. I'm sorry, Brandon said, sniffling. Richard had only been trying to help, and Brandon had thrown a temper tantrum like a 2-year-old. Richard sat down wearily next to Brandon and put his hand on his shoulder. It's all right, kid. I understand, he said. Look, there's a dozen floors between here and your dad. That floor where all the smoke was coming from, that had to be where the plane hit. So your dad, everybody in windows on the world up to the 107th floor, they're all right. All right, maybe, but trapped, Brandon thought, above a fire that's burning. The firemen will put out the fire, and then they'll hack their way up through that mess and save them, if they don't take them off the roof by helicopter first, Richard told them. He's going to be all right, kid. Brandon hoped so. But what about him? He and his dad needed each other to survive. How was Brandon supposed to handle all of this without him? Richard stood and tried the door to the 92nd floor. Jammed, he said. No telling if anybody's alive in there, and no getting through. Let's check the other doors on the way back down, though. Make sure everybody's okay. And then we'll go back to my office and wait for the firemen, all right? Brandon nodded. Richard started to pick his way down through the rubble toward the 91st floor, and Brandon gave one last look up the stairs. The 93rd floor was the cutoff. No one below it could go higher, and no one above it could go lower. That was the line that separated Team Chavez. From now on, Brandon was a team of one. Chapter 14, Rashmina, Kachi. Pasoon's grip on Rashmina slipped, and she fell a few centimeters before he caught her again. The American helicopter kept hovering right behind her. Rashmina knew that within one squeeze of the pilot's trigger finger, bullets would tear through her and her brother. Everything she had cared about, everything she had worked for and struggled for, would all be gone in an instant. Come on, Rashmina, Pasoon cried over the roar of the helicopter. Climb! Pasoon shifted his weight and pulled harder on her hand. Rashmina's fear and panic gave her desperate strength, and she wriggled her chest up onto the edge of the cliff and swung a leg up and over. Pasoon dragged her the rest of the way over the edge, and they collapsed in each other's arms, weary but safe, except for the helicopter. Rashmina turned around again. The Apache's blades swirled in the air, blowing Rashmina's headscarf back from her hair and face. Rashmina thought she saw the pilot talking into the mic at his mouth. Was somebody far away deciding her fate, the same way somebody far away, piloting a drone, had decided her sister Gila's fate? Rashmina stared into the eyes of the helicopter pilot. Would those be the last eyes she ever saw? The Apache hung in the air a moment longer, and then, as suddenly as it had come, it tilted and lifted away to the right, leaving Rashmina and Pasoon where they sat on the edge of the cliff. Rashmina slumped against her brother. She wanted to flop back on the ground and pass out, but the pops and booms of the Americans and the Taliban still fighting behind them meant she and Pasoon were still too exposed. Pasoon knew it too. They helped each other up, and with a quick squeeze of Pasoon's hand, Rashmina thanked him for saving her life. Pasoon nodded, and then they hurried along the cliff, putting as much mountain between themselves and the battle as they could. They followed a goat path down and around the mountainside, where they ran into an old abandoned logging camp. It was a small plateau where people had once lived, while they cut down Afghanistan's towering cedars and pines and sold them across the border to Pakistan. The Americans had shut most of these logging camps down, convinced the money made there was being used to buy weapons for the Taliban, but the move had backfired in a way. When the loggers were put out of work, many of them traded their chainsaws for rifles and joined the very same insurgents the Americans were trying to stop. An explosion boomed from the other side of the ridge, and a tall gray mushroom cloud spiraled over the peak. Rashmina took Pasoon's hand again, and they dove behind a pile of old cedars as bullets peppered the logs. Rashmina wanted to scream, partly from fear and partly from anger. She had just gone looking for her brother. She hadn't expected to end up in the middle of a battle. Why couldn't everyone just leave them alone? Rashmina stayed flat on her face for a moment, catching her breath. When she finally looked up, she was staring straight into the eyes of a camel. The sight of it was so silly, so surreal after what they'd just been through, that she wanted to laugh out loud. Pasoon did laugh. Ha! Pfft. The camel spit into Pasoon's face. Gross, Pasoon cried, and he wiped his face on his sleeve. Pasoon? Rashmina said, putting a hand on his arm. Pasoon froze. There were even more camels sitting behind the woodpile, and people too. 20 or 30 of them, an entire tribe of men, women, and children, all cross-legged on the ground, staring at Rashmina and her brother. The men were white-bearded and wore trousers and turbans and long tunics like Rashmina's father did. Most of the women wore tunics and pants like Rashmina, but a few wore dresses with full skirts and wide sleeves decorated with metallic laces and pendants and amulets. The children huddled among them, the boys wrapped in blankets, the girls wrapped in shawls, unblinking and unmoving. These people were Kochi, Rashmina realized suddenly. She had seen them before, but only in the distance. The Kochi were nomads. They had no year-round home, instead traveling back and forth across the border from Afghanistan to Pakistan with the seasons, selling rugs they made and trading the meat and cheese and wool from their goats and sheep and camels. "Hi," Rashmina said. The Kochi stared at her and Passoon. Rock and dirt exploded from the mountaintop above them as the battle between the Taliban and the Americans raged on, but the Kochi and their animals didn't even flinch. "Let's get out of here," Passoon whispered. He tried to get up and go, but Rashmina pulled him back down. "Not with them still shooting," Rashmina told him. One by one, the Kochi unrolled prayer rugs. Rashmina couldn't believe it. They were going to pray right here, with an American helicopter flying around shooting bullets every which way? Rashmina and her brother felt obligated to join them. Ordinarily, they would have done wudu, washed and cleaned themselves with water in preparation for praying. They made tayammum instead, using the dust from the ground to clean themselves. God was forgiving and merciful, and would still accept their prayers if He willed it. Better to pray than not to pray, their father always told them. Rashmina fixed her headscarf and stood and bowed, stood and knelt. God knew Rashmina's heart better than she knew her own, and when she sat to ask for forgiveness, she also said a prayer for Passoon. "Please help turn my brother's heart from revenge," Rashmina prayed. "Please show him another path." Rashmina spied Passoon's toy airplane sticking out of his pocket. She snatched it and tucked it away under her tunic while he had his eyes closed in prayer. She still hoped God would answer her prayers, but it didn't hurt to have a backup plan. When they were finished praying, an old Kochi woman stood and came over to Rashmina and Passoon. "Come," she said, and held out a hand. Rashmina glanced at her brother. His scowl was back. Rashmina knew her brother wanted to be on his way to the Taliban, not playing nice with nomads. But they still could hear the ting-tung-tung of the Taliban rifles over the ridge. She and her brother weren't going anywhere, not yet. Rashmina accepted the old woman's invitation, and she and Passoon crouched low as they followed her to a small blanket where a mother and a father sat with their 2 children. The old woman was their grandmother, Rashmina guessed. Chickens clucked quietly in wooden cages all around them, and a baby camel in a tightly bundled blanket twisted its long neck to sniff them. 3 baby goats bleated and butted their heads against Rashmina and Passoon as they sat down. Naan, rice, cooked chicken, and pistachios were already laid out on the blanket in bowls, and the old woman offered the food to her guests. Passoon dug in greedily, and Rashmina gave him a swift elbow to the ribs. They had to accept the act of hospitality. To refuse would be a grave insult, but they shouldn't eat too much either. The Kochi were clearly poor, and the rice alone must have been very precious to a tribe with no land of their own. Rashmina took small pieces of naan and a pinch of rice and nodded her thanks. Passoon frowned, but he did the same. Rashmina looked around at the Kochis as she ate. What would happen if the battle between the Americans and Taliban spilled over the ridge? What would all these people do? There was nowhere for them to go, nowhere else for them to hide. Rashmina seemed to be the only one worried about it. The 2 little children giggled as baby goats butted Passoon for his food. The grandmother worked at weaving a carpet on a small portable loom, and the father looped and knotted cloth into some kind of satchel. The mother cradled something under her shawl, and Rashmina was surprised to see a tiny baby wrapped up so tightly in swaddling clothes that it couldn't move anything but its little mouth. Its eyes fluttered closed as it drifted off to sleep. What must it be like to live this way, Rashmina wondered, to be born under the sky, to be raised on the move, and to sleep around a softly crackling fire. There was a charming simplicity to it. The Kochi owned only what their camels could carry, did only what was necessary to survive. There was no walking 3 kilometers to school every day, no fitting homework in, around housework. Rashmina doubted any of them could read, let alone do long division. They certainly didn't know what a computer was, and didn't care. Passoon appeared to be just as charmed, laughing with the children as a baby goat tried to climb their father's back. Rashmina wished for a moment that she and her brother were both Kochi. It seemed like the nomads existed in their own worlds, one completely separate from the conflict between the Taliban and the Americans. She knew it couldn't be that simple, that the Kochi had to have been drawn into the war and affected by it, just like everyone else. But she loved the idea of climbing on a camel and leaving all of this behind. The explosions on the other side of the mountain moved away down the valley, and Passoon stood. "I have to go," he said. And the spell was broken. Rashmina bowed their thanks again to the old woman and her family, stood and hurried to follow her brother. She caught up to him just outside the old logging camp and grabbed him by the arm. "Oh, no, you don't," Rashmina said. "You're not going to the Taliban, Passoon." Passoon pulled free. "Watch me," he said, and kept moving. Rashmina seethed. Her brother could be so stupid sometimes. "You grew up in a jam bottle," she told him, following on his heels. "You're the daughter of a sheep," Passoon fired back. "May you be eaten by termites," Rashmina told him. She could trade insults with her brother all day. Go home, Passoon told her. You're not even supposed to be out without a male chaperone. Rashmina caught up again and matched her brother step for step. Well, I have one now, she told him. You're not coming with me, Passoon told her. Watch me, Rashmina said. Passoon stopped and turned on Rashmina. There is nothing you can say or do to stop me from going to the Taliban, he told her. Oh yeah, Rashmina said. She pulled a toy airplane from inside her tunic and waggled it just outside his reach. Then I suppose you don't mind leaving without this? Chapter 15. Brandon. The Waterfall of Flames. Brandon and Richard came out of the stairwell cautiously, tentatively, scanning the 91st floor. They had seen fire through the walls just above them, but there was no fire here. Not yet. There were no people here either. They went through every office they could get through the rubble and debris. A shipping company, 2 banks, 2 investment companies, a Manhattan Cultural Council. There were a lot of cubicles, a lot of desks, but each of them was empty. Brandon was searching one of the offices when he saw something fall past the window outside. Was that a person? Brandon shook his head to clear it. It couldn't have been a person. Nobody in their right mind would jump from the Twin Towers this high up. Brandon remembered the wind lifting him off his hands and knees, dragging him toward the open edge of the skyscraper before Richard had caught him and pulled him inside. Had someone else been trying to cross a similar divide and been swept away in the wind? He shuddered just thinking about it. Hey, kid, you find anything? Richard's voice was soft, but Brandon jumped. They had both been whispering, as though they talked too loud the whole building would come down around them like an avalanche. No, I thought I saw a body falling past the window, Brandon said. Richard recoiled. God, I hope not. No, can't be. Just your mind playing tricks on you. Brandon nodded. That had to be it. Didn't it? A huge crack ran down the length of the floor in one hallway, almost 50 yards long. The hallway led right into the central part of the floor, the one with the bathroom and elevators and stairwell. Smoke poured out from the elevator banks, and Brandon and Richard held their wet cloths tight against their noses and mouths. It helped, but Brandon's eyes still stung from the heavy smoke. On the north side of the building, the ceiling had completely collapsed. The plane must have hit somewhere on this side of the building on the floors up above. Come on, Richard said. Everybody's got themselves up and out of here. We should do the same. Let's check the next floor real fast, and then get back to our people on 89. Brandon followed Richard down to the 90th floor. He was surprised to come out of the stairwell and see 2 people standing in the hall, a white man in paint-splattered coveralls and a black woman in a business skirt and blouse. They stood near the elevators like they were waiting for one to arrive. Hey, Richard said to them, we're from 1 floor down. We're checking to make sure you guys are all right up here. We are, the woman said. She gestured to the elevator. But they're not. Brandon turned to look. The elevator door was open and 5 people were inside, 3 men and 2 women. They were all dressed in business suits and clearly terrified. The elevator was full of swirling black smoke, and they ducked and cried out as sparks popped in the elevator ceiling. Panic rose in Brandon as he remembered that awful feeling of being trapped in an elevator, of it sliding, dropping. You have to get out of there, Brandon cried. He rushed toward the elevator doors, but the man outside in the hallway held him back. They can't, the painter told Brandon. Look at the stuff falling from the door. An eerie, iridescent blue haze shimmered down like a curtain between the open doors in the elevator car, blocking the way in and out. The passengers in the elevator would have to go right through the haze to get out. What is that stuff? Richard asked. Fire, said the one man in the elevator. It's like a sheet of blue flame. Brandon was momentarily memorized by it. He'd never seen anything like it in his entire life. A steady stream of bright blue flame, like a super hot gas stove. What could cause that? As they all watched, the blue haze drip more heavily. Soon it would be a waterfall of pure flames. We don't want to run through it, said one of the women inside the elevator. We're all afraid we'll get burned. The elevator groaned and dropped an inch, and everyone in the car screamed. Goosebumps moved up Brandon's arm at the top of his head, and he got the sickening feeling of falling all over again. You have to get out of there, Brandon told them. I was in an elevator when the plane hit. We barely got out in time before the cable snapped and the elevator car fell down the shaft. One of the men in the elevator groaned, and another one cursed. We called building security, said the woman in the hallway. They said to wait for the fire department. Somebody's looking for something to block the flames, the painter said. A cardboard box or something. Cardboard is just going to catch fire, one of the men in the elevator yelled. He was clearly at his wits' end. They all had to be. Another man was pacing frantically back and forth, the armpits of her shirt ringed with sweat. One woman cried with her eyes closed. The other was muttering something under her breath. Whether it was curses or regrets or prayers, Brandon didn't know. What about a fire extinguisher? Richard asked. To extinguish what? One of the men in the elevator said. The fire's raining down through the elevator shaft. The source is somewhere upstairs. The 93rd floor, Brandon thought. He and Richard had seen it, and no fire extinguisher was going to put out those flames. Until the inferno upstairs was extinguished by the fire department, it was going to keep burning in both directions. Something clunked in the elevator shaft above, and the elevator dropped another 2 inches. The passengers grabbed onto the railings and cried out. One of the men started sobbing. The woman who had been muttering to herself stood taller, as though she'd come to some sort of decision. I'm getting out, she said. Her voice was shaky and her eyes were wide with panic. I'm going to go through the blue stuff, whatever it is. She nodded, talking herself into it. It's just flames, right? I mean, you can run your hands through a candle flame and be fine. I'll just be fast. No one tried to talk her out of it. The other passengers parted for her, and she positioned herself in the middle of the doorway. Richard and Brandon and the 2 other people in the hall got out of her way. The woman took a deep breath, covered her face with her hands, and darted through the blue mist. For a moment, for a half a heartbeat, everything was fine, and then the woman burst into flames. She screamed and beat at her burning hair as she collapsed to the floor. Brandon had never seen anything like it outside a horror movie, and experiencing it now, feeling the raging heat, hearing her awful screams made him want to retch. Inside the elevator, the other woman screamed, and one of the men threw up. "Roll, roll," the painter said, and unbelievably, she had the presence of mind to do it. Richard beat the last of the flames with the wet shirt he carried, putting out the fire for good. The woman had burned so hot and so fast she even set the carpet on fire. "Don't come through," the painter told everyone else in the elevator. "The stuff's jet fuel or something." The other woman in the hallway went running for water. The bird woman crawled over to the wall and leaned against it. "I think I'm a little burned," the woman said. Brandon didn't want to look, but he couldn't take his eyes off the lady. Her hair was gone. Her hands and arms were burned badly. "I can't even feel it," the woman whispered. The woman in a business skirt ran back with a cup of water, but no one knew what to do. She poured some of the water over the burned woman's bubbling pink arm, and the burned lady screamed. "We've got to take her down the steps," the painter said. "Get her to the hospital." Down the steps, Brandon thought. They were 90 floors up. "Can you move?" the businesswoman asked her. The burned woman wept. Blisters were forming all over her body, but she nodded. The painter and the businesswoman lifted her to her feet, and she cried out in pain. "We'll take her down. You 2 stay here," the painter told Brandon and Richard. "See if you can find something to block the blue flame and get the rest of those people." The painter looked back over his shoulder and froze. Brandon turned. The elevator car wasn't there anymore. No, Brandon thought, no, they couldn't have fallen. They were just here. His heart in his throat, Brandon edged as close as he dared to the river of burning jet fuel and looked down. Broken cables dangled where the car had been, and the elevator shaft was a big, empty black hole. The elevator car had fallen. How far, Brandon didn't know. All the way to the basement? Wherever it had gone, the 4 people inside were surely dead.